After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. When they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. "Get up," he said. "Take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him." So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I called my son." When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. "A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more." After Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who were trying to take the child's life are dead." So he got up, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning in Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Having been warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee, and he went and lived in a town called Nazareth. So was fulfilled what was said through the prophets, that he would be called a Nazarene.
We 3 kings of Orient are, having gifts which traverse afar, field and fountain, moor and mountain, following yonder star. O star of wonder, star of night, star with royal beauty bright, westward leading still proceed, guide us to thy perfect light. O the King on Bethlehem plain, God I bring to crown him again, King forever, ceasing never, sighing, bleeding, dying, sealed in the stone-cold tomb. O star one, star night, star with royal beauty bright, rest the dreaming still proceed, guide us to thy perfect light. Glorious thou, beholding us light, heaven born and Sunday rejoice, and sings Hallelujah, Hallelujah, God in Christ. O star one, star night, star with royal beauty bright, rest the dreaming still proceeding, guide us to
Os Guinness, the brilliant Christian writer, once remarked that there's always a tension between what people say they are and who they really are. And it's always been like this. I'm well aware of this in myself, and in pastoral ministry, I'm all too aware of it in others as well. It doesn't matter if we're doing the preaching or serving refreshments, if we're in church leadership or doing a music ministry. It doesn't matter if we're long-standing members or total newcomers. I guess the difference is if we've been around longer, then we know better how to mask the reality. We even know the right conventions, the right language, the right facial tics. And that's why arriving somewhere new could be so tricky and so awkward. I mean, you come in, you don't know the rules, you make cultural gaffes, you have to ask where the bathrooms are and what people are supposed to do with their coats. And the result, well, the stranger always sticks out a mile, and yet the old-timer knows exactly how to act. There's always a tension between what people say they are and who they really are. Now, if Guinness is right, and I'm sure he is, then we all must be careful. And our passage today illustrates this point beautifully because Matthew pits together two groups of people that could not be more different. In the red corner, we have the definitive insiders, the king, surrounded by his court of religious leaders. And then in the blue corner, we have the ultimate outsiders, a group of Persian magi or astrologers. Now, a magi was perhaps the ancient equivalent of a New Age tarot card reader. I don't know. It's probably a bit unfair. I think tarot card readers aren't nearly as sharp as these people. These were highly educated men who knew the night sky so well that they could spot tiny changes and thus draw all sorts of conclusions about life in the future, as if life was ordered by the movements of planets and suns. But the reality is that they were not the type we would expect to be part of God's global purposes. They certainly didn't know the social conventions for God's people. They were outsiders in every way. But I imagine these wise men were so excited just to be there. They were feeling that. And I suspect that the day when the Magi crowded through the doorway of Mary and Joseph's humble abode, that was also a moment of sheer exhilaration. I mean, could you imagine experiencing what this meant to Mary and Joseph? Matthew chapter 2, verses 9 through 11. After they heard the king, that is to say, when the Magi heard about the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Could you imagine how the mere presence of these Persian stargazers gave an aura of wonder and mystery to the whole thing? And when these Gentile wise men began worshiping the child, could you imagine the rush this gave Mary and Joseph? And then it intensified. The expensive gifts are brought out, astonishing gifts, only for a king, gold given to the child, frankincense, which in that culture was worth more than gold, myrrh, truly gifted for a king. And it's not just the wonder of the star, it's financial relief. Kids normally bring with them a bit of financial pressure, don't they, to a family? But this one comes with a trust fund. And it's marvelous, and they would have seen perhaps their poverty alleviated a bit. What a relief. And next time they come to Bethlehem, they could stay at the Ritz-Carlton. And when the Magi, overwhelmed with excitement, would tell their story, the story of tracking this natal star for 1,000 miles, could you imagine hearing it? All the way from Persia. It would have jolted their already pounding hearts. I mean, they didn't know the story, and then they're told, oh, we've come from 1,000 miles away. We followed a star. We brought gold, frankincense, and myrrh. I mean, Mary and Joseph, their hearts would have been exploding at that journey. What a jolt. And a journey not made by airplane or by car. They didn't traverse the desert in an SUV. No, it was 1,000 miles in the saddle. And I would think that the parents, after the Magi left, would have stepped out into the night sky and just to clear their minds, and they looked up and they saw that star, and they've seen this cosmic reality, and it's for this child. In any event, I suppose it would have taken a long time for Mary and Joseph to calm down and go to sleep that night. Don't you think they'd have a talk before they went to bed? But interestingly, in their dreams that night was something altogether different. Matthew chapter 2, verse 13, when they, the Magi, had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. Get up, he said, take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. Now this warning is urgent. It's explicit. Get up, take the child, escape. And Joseph's obedience is immediate. It's immediate, it's impressive. Matthew chapter 2, verse 14, so he got up, took the child and his mother during the night and left for Egypt. You know, he doesn't roll over and say, do you have an idea what time it is? I'm totally exhausted. This will have to wait for morning. No, he immediately obeys. And in fact, Joseph is to be commended because of his obedience. These opening narratives, in the first chapter, when Joseph awoke from the sleep, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded him. He took Mary as his wife. He just does it. And then in our chapter today, go up and take the child and escape. He does it. He takes the child and he goes. His obedience is there. And so he rouses Mary, packs a few of their belongings, including the gold, frankincense, and myrrh divinely provided for the journey, and they escape towards Egypt. I imagine as soon as it was prudent, having crept out of town, they quickened their steps, and the angel told them to get up, that Herod wants to kill, and it soon becomes a flight. It was 75 miles to the provincial border, and all 500 miles down to Egypt. So they get to the border, and they move down through the Judean Arc, through Beersheba, all the way across the wilderness of Sin, through the Sinai Peninsula, and then they're down on the Nile. Now, Egypt was a natural place to flee because it was a well-ordered province. It was outside of Herod's jurisdiction, and it had a large expatriate population of Jews there. Some scholars think there were at least 1 million Jews there at the time, so it's a great place to get lost, to be in anonymity. And far away from there, well, the great dangers from Herod are happening in Judea. And what dangers they are. This is the need for escape. Chapter 2, verse 16, when Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. That's vicious, isn't it? Could you imagine this revolting order being given? Have you ever thought about this at Christmas? Wipe out every male baby under 2 in Bethlehem. All of them, Your Majesty, says the captain of Herod's guards. Yes, all of them. Immediately, Your Majesty. Yes, all of them. Throughout Bethlehem, Your Majesty. Yes. And all the surrounding areas. Yes, now just go and do it. And not just the newborns or the ones that are under 2 years old. I want you to go down to the registry office. Go through the list. I want all of them killed. Oh, sorry, sir. Throughout Bethlehem? Yes, and the surrounding areas. Now get on with it. Well, I wonder if you've ever seen The Massacre of the Innocents by Nicolas Poussin. What a painting that is. What a Christmas story. It's alarming. It's quite gory and macabre. And of course, you never see that make its way into Christmas cards. By the way, if you do get a Christmas card with Poussin's Massacre of the Innocents, mark down the person who gave it to you because they're probably a little bit sick. I mean, it's desperate. But we've got to get our heads around this. This is what the first Christmas looked like. I don't know if you ever thought about it, but the first Christmas in Bethlehem was a Christmas war. It's a terrible story of murder. Herod was king, the killer king. He was a psychopath. He killed 2 of his own sons. He killed 2 of his own brothers. And could you imagine this scene in your mind's eye? Little baby boys torn from their mother's arms. I mean, it doesn't get any worse than that. Torn from their mother's arms. I mean, they'd heard the screams and seen the first one die. They know what's coming. So the mothers flee down the road and they're ridden down by horsemen. Soldiers were there with blood all over their swords, and there's the fathers and the grandfathers and uncles, little brothers standing by powerless. I mean, they've seen what happened to the first father who tried to resist. And now they're holding the corpses of these innocent baby boys. Boys who just 5 minutes before had been lighting up the house, toddling around, demanding attention. They're the light of the house, and suddenly they're gone forever. So Bethlehem's first Christmas, when you think about it, was dreadful. Dreadful. I mean, oh, little town of Bethlehem, how still we see thee lie. What nonsense. No. There's no sleep and dreamless sleep. There's wailing. There's heartbreak from which you never recover from. That's what's happening here. That's what's happening in this community. I don't know. I mean, perhaps you have the classic Hallmark nativity picture in your mind's eye, and that's all well and good. But if that's all you've had, then you missed the Christmas of the Bible. You've missed the Christmas of history, the Christmas of theology, and you're certainly not thinking biblically or Christianly. So at Christmas, there are certain words that lift us, and so they should, and they evoke strong feelings. They're kind of in our DNA. They're part of the reason that even in the run-up to Christmas, that there's so much excitement and anticipation every year. It still puts a spring in our step because there's joy, and they connect these words with something deep inside us. So here are the Christmas words in today's reading. Verse 5, Bethlehem in Judea, the Magi, the star. Verse 11, the child with his mother Mary. Verse 11, gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. There's joy, there's hope, there's anticipation, there's a fresh start. But if we're to think biblically, Christianly, authentically, maturely, we mustn't leave it there. No, we've got to also get the next passage in our minds, images of the Christian war that don't make it onto Christmas cards. And here they are. Take the child, escape to Egypt. Herod's going to search for the child, kill him. Herod was furious. He gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem. That has to be there too. And of course, the nation says, no, just give us the first Christmas. Don't give us verses 13 through 16. Don't be such a miserable pastor. But Matthew gives us both. I don't know if you've ever seen that. So he gives us verse 18. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning. Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. So Rachel was one of the great heroines of Israel's history. In fact, she was the mother of the nation, and she was buried at Ramah just outside of Bethlehem. And to see these innocent Israelite boys being murdered by King Herod would leave her turning in her grave and weeping in her tomb. And now the question is, I guess this is it. Why? Why are we to hold the wonder of the nativity and the horror of the story of the innocents together? Why does Matthew hold them together? Why in Matthew chapter 2 are the two kept together? Why? Because the Bible, ladies and gentlemen, is always real about life. It's real. It's reality. It understands that for many Christmases, like the opening line in Charles Dickens' Tale of Two Cities, it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. So yes, it can be filled with those words in verses 5 through 11. It can conjure up oceans of joy and anticipation, expectation, hope, love, and affection, and that's great, and don't ever let me rob you of that. So Bethlehem, the baby, the star, the manger, the shepherds, the wise men, the Holy Family together, but there can also be sorrow and bereavement, misunderstanding, loneliness, heartbreak, selfishness that torpedoes the whole family. And so your Christmas may well be something of verse 18, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted. So Christmas and weeping can go together. And some of you know that. That's real for some of you. And you've come today with a heavy heart, and I'm saying it's here in Matthew's gospel. And don't you think that actually one of the reasons people perhaps only come to church once a year, just to Christmas, or maybe just Christmas and Easter, but perhaps they just come at Christmas because in their minds, they only have the positive feelings, the peace, the gifts, the birth, the little child, the angels, the light. They only have those positive feelings on their agenda. And, a bit of sentimentality is fine, just for once a year. It's okay for once a year. We all like a bit of escapism, but no one can afford to live in this land of make-believe all year round. We're not naive. So in the mind of many, Christmas is just a bit of make-believe. It's far from the reality of the grubby world in which we actually live. So it's of little wonder that so many don't come back. Once the grind of life takes hold again in January, Christmas was lovely, but it doesn't deal with the nitty-gritty of life. And Matthew says, yes, it does. Yes, it does. Real life at its most brutal is here, the slaughter of the innocents. So this is not a descent you see into sentimentality. It's great joy, it's great hope. The world has changed, but it's not a descent into sentimentality. And here we are. This is the 12th and final day of Christmas, a time of good cheer and joy and celebration. And it's also a time where we read of 15 people celebrating the New Year's holiday being run down and killed in a senseless attack on the innocents. An unprecedented time of suicide and drug overdose, deaths from alcohol, time of loneliness, isolation, of deep political divide, a time of murder, injustice, rising prices, Christian persecution. Bethlehem, they knew the suffering and pain. So you see, there's a dark side to Christmas which keeps it appallingly real. But we're not left with just this, just the terrible evil and darkness. We're also left with the Christmas diagnosis. There's a Christmas war, but it's been diagnosed. If we take a look at Herod, it's so simple, it's so profound. It's the diagnosis of what's wrong in the world. And the great question is, who will be king in verses 1, 2, and 3? That's at the heart of this passage. At the dark side of Christmas, who will be king? And you can see Matthew introducing it in verses 1, 2, and 3. We'll just look at this as we go through. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born king of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose, and we have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. Now, can I just say that the word disturbed is far too weak? In the original, it's much more of a sense of total distress, of weeping. So you can see in this passage that there are two kings. That one is a king in God's kingdom, proclaimed by a star, by the wise men, announced by the cosmos. And then there is the man-made king, King Herod, half Jew, half Edomite, appointed by the Roman Senate in 40 BC, always vulnerable to the claimants of the true king from the Davidic dynasty, always vulnerable to the ones with royal credentials, which are laid out in the genealogy of Matthew chapter 1. And you can see in verse 8 that having spoken to the Magi, Herod claims he wants to go and worship the child king. Matthew chapter 2, verse 8, he sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child, and as soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." But actually, as we know, Herod wants to reject and kill God's king. So in verse 16, he gives orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem. This child must not be missed. He must be liquidated. And that's Matthew's point here. He's saying, what will you do with God's king? Will you be like Herod, who rejects him, who pretends that he's worshiping him, but actually is set on murder? Or will you be like the Magi, who, verse 2, have come to worship Jesus, verse 11, present their gifts to him, verse 16, side with the child, and outwit Herod by returning home a different route? And to put this on a cosmic reality, a cosmic scale, Matthew would say ultimately that when we reject Jesus over the little Herods in our lives, our lusts, our wants, our selfishness, our desires, well, that's Matthew's diagnosis of the Christmas war. And this may have happened to you this Christmas, as perhaps you've had quite a difficult domestic scene, or maybe you spent Christmas alone because actually there's a domestic scene that you can't handle. It's the heart of a little Herod. But the problem is that I see it in my heart too. Our hearts, there's such a battle they need to be led. So who could lead our hearts? Where do we go so that we can have some of the joy and some of the peace at Christmas? Well, the question is, you see, can Jesus Christ be trusted to lead me as God's king? We need to ask, why trust him? And Matthew chapter 1, verse 21, Joseph is told by the angels, you're to give him the name of Jesus because he will save his people from their sin. So for the numerous times that I've been a little Herod, Jesus died so that I could be forgiven for rejecting his authority. He comes to die so that I could be forgiven for me shaking my fist at him. When we were his enemies, he came to die for us. As he was born to die was over the manger. He'll die in death and blood for me. Can I not trust him? So the name Jesus means Savior and Rescuer. Trust him because he's called Jesus, but also trust him because he's called the Christ. That means the anointed one, the king. He really does display the power of God's king in God's world. So Matthew makes it clear that Herod's power and kingship, though mighty at the time, will come to an end. Verse 19. After Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who were trying to take the child's life are dead. Herod would die, and all the little Herods will be overthrown by death, but not Jesus. This is why we come to him. This is his extraordinary power. He was born of a virgin. He was born in Bethlehem. He escaped to Egypt, and ultimately he rose from the dead. So he lived and taught. He had a band of followers. He was tried in a Roman and Jewish court. He was sentenced to die. They strung him on a cross. They put a spear through his side. They took him off the cross, certified him as dead, and 3 days later he was walking around again. Herod couldn't do that. And because Jesus rises from the dead, he says, in the face of death, will you put your hand in my hand? In the face of life, will you trust me to lead you through? He proves his power by the fact that he rises from the dead. Have you checked that out, the resurrection? Do you trust it? If it's true, life can never be the same again. Do you trust him? Do you know him? You see, what we've got here are two Christmases. There are two kings that drive the two Christmases. The one king given gold, frankincense, and myrrh. The other slaughtering the innocents. And the question is, who will you follow? And if you want joy, love, hope, anticipation, then it means come to Christ. But do so in the real world. Do so in the world that knows the reality of 2025. And during this last bit of Christmas, we'd love for you to get to know the person of Jesus as he walks off the pages of Scripture. If you want the joy, if you want the love, if you want the peace, if you want that in a real world, then come to Jesus as King and trust him to lead you. Amen.